On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Adam Jacob. He is the CEO and co-founder of System Initiative. We're going to be talking about why DevOps ends up with less than ideal results. Adam's got a fantastic background. You probably all know about him. If you don't, you'll look him up on LinkedIn and see his extensive work in the space. And he's going to walk us through why we have some of those failure rates, what to look for on door reports that maybe we're not looking for. And there's a second wave of DevOps tools already coming, and we're going to talk about the impact and why now. Adam, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome, man. Awesome. All right. Before we dive in, System Initiative, tell everyone what the company does so we have a little bit of baseline.
Yeah. I mean, in the very shortest possible version, we build essentially like a collaborative power tool that's designed to remove the paper cuts from DevOps work, which is a very high level headline. But basically, imagine that what we do is we've rethought the workflow for how DevOps work could happen by rebuilding a technology platform that sort of thinks fundamentally differently about how we model the automation we need to build and how we then build the interactions on top of it. So if you think about a lot of the things that are hard about the current DevOps way we do DevOps now, it's things like how do we collaborate with each other and how do we make the feedback loops shorter and how do we build high fidelity models of what we need while also allowing higher level abstractions to work for people who have to interact with those models at higher levels. So if I'm an application developer, I care about deployment. I don't so much care about the tuning details of the Postgres database, until I do, at which point I need to be able to like pierce that abstraction and get all the way down to those details and sort of see how it all connects. So that's what System Initiative is really designed to do.
Awesome. And we'll obviously include your LinkedIn and links to the company. And if somebody does look you up, if they're not aware who you are, you obviously spent a lot of time in the space. I guess you were Chef. You were co-founder of Chef.
Yeah, I wrote Chef originally. I'm a systems administrator, really by trade, most of my career. That's becoming less and less true the longer it goes. Like Chef, the System Initiative was like 15 years. I had a 15-year career before that. Chef was like a 15-year journey. I had a 15-year career before that. So for a long time, I could say that I was a systems administrator more than I was anything else. That's probably becoming less true by wall clock time, but I still feel like a systems administrator in my heart, if that makes sense. And yeah, I've been around a lot of the sort of DevOps movement and I spent a lot of time in like big enterprises, helping people understand how to think about doing DevOps work and how to think about putting those tools together. And yeah, that's kind of me.
So, the theme of the podcast is DevOps ends up with less than ideal results. And if I'm someone who's in DevOps listening to this, I'm thinking, hey, we just implemented, our CI/CD pipelines done. I feel really good.
It's a lot better than it was before.
Was a lot better than that. But yeah, exactly. People are happy. We're deploying on all those things are great, but it might be less than ideal. And I think that's an interesting question. And maybe where we should start off is when we're talking about DevOps and ideal. In your definition, what does an ideal implementation look like?
That's a great question. I think there's always sort of two good answers. One's like the objective outcomes. So like what happens to the business because we've made these changes? Like, can we fulfill the business's needs? Are we agile in the face of changes? Can we collaborate together to build and deploy complex things rapidly and safely and all of the things, right? So there's that piece. The other is, what's your day look like and how does it feel to do the work you did? So, it's one thing to be like, yes, we got that done for the business or we got it done at whatever the rate was. If the actual doing of the work feels like garbage, then that's also a subpar outcome, right? Like if it's happening, but it sucks for the people who are doing the work, then that's also a failure of the system and of its design, right? And eventually that tends to lead to bad outcomes as well. But, when you look at like organizational theory, there's like a bunch of interesting research that talks about how like the highest performing teams have like really high degrees of autonomy and trust. And like the number 2 team is like a tyrant, right? Like just somebody who's just being awful to people. They burn through people, and it's not good for the human beings involved, but the outcomes could be pretty good, even though they're not sustainable. So I think you have to look at both Like, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve for the business, and are we achieving it? And are we actually meeting the needs of what we need to do? And on the flip side, you also have to look at like, what's the lived experience of the people doing the work, and how do they feel about the work that they're doing, and how do they feel about interacting with it day over day.
Absolutely. Before we get to what, obviously we'll talk about some of the issues of what's not working. We talk about high failure rates. For the teams that do have successful outcomes, are there factors that you've seen that lead to those being successful as opposed to not?
I mean, pretty much you can boil it down to like, what is that rate of collaboration, and how collaborative are those people and are those teams? If you look at what, we've got lots of studies over a long period of time. The Dora report's the best of them probably, but if you kind of distill it all out, those who figure out how to collaborate together more often do better, and the outcomes are better both for the business and for the people who are doing the work. When you then look at the implementations that we tend to build of how we're doing DevOps, what's the list of tools we stitch together, how do we stitch them together, what's the final workflow look like for the people who do that work across the board? Very frequently it's not full of collaboration, right? The tooling actually pushes you to like do artifact handoffs, right? Even when we talk about pipelines, right? How's a pipeline work? Well, somebody does work on one end, and then at each stage that work gets pushed along, and we somebody tweaks it or changes it, or, we basically automated the process as we found it in 1999, right? And said, oh, well, yeah, okay, there was a QA process that used to be people, and now it's not. Now it's the little QA robots that run the tests every time you put the thing in, but it's still basically the same shape. Most collaboration kind of happens around code review, which the clue that it's not collaborative is in the name, right? It's we didn't actually collaborate on the code. We collaborated on reviewing. At best, we collaborated after the fact. And I think when you look at what actually turns the needle, it's the same as what we saw in like one of the original foundational moments for DevOps was the talk that John Allspaw and Paul Hammond gave about Flickr doing 10 deploys a day, which blew everyone's mind, right? 10 deploys a day, unheard of at the size and scale that someone like Flickr was operating at. Bananas, right? And if you listen to what they said was, we sit right next to each other, we talk to each other all day, every day, and we're constantly collaborating to ensure that we can build and deploy and manage Flickr. And it's this complex socio-technical system. But the heart of their story wasn't the tooling, although it was the collaboration. It was that they were close together all the time, and that people had access to all that information and all of those things. And that the data's really borne that out. That if you can push people together, the more you get people together and get them talking about what's happening and talking about what to do and collaborating and bringing their expertise to the fore, and then applying that to the problem, the better the outcomes.
Do you see, and before we go forward, a question about that. Do you see the obviously through COVID, the whole remote culture was born. Now we have some kind of dynamic of wanting to go back to the office. People want to be remote, questions of productivity. When you look at the DevOps space, because I know a lot of DevOps engineers, I think I would know their answer at this, but I want your views. When you're looking, and you may say collaboration is very important, does remote hurt or help, or does it move the needle, or is it really collaboration is collaboration regardless?
I think people tend to think of remote and async as being the same thing. So when they say they're remote, what they mean is that like they're collaborating, they're communicating in an asynchronous way. And I think the thing about async work is that it's tough for it to be collaborative, because by definition, if we're not together, it's tough to collaborate. And I think you hear that a lot in the arguments people make about a return to the office. They're like, well, look, because we're remote, we can't work together. And so we need to go back to the office so that we can get that collaboration back, and we can get back to a state where we actually work together. I think that that's mostly bullshit, in that, like, if you look at how people work in offices, like, we weren't actually working together in the office either. We were just nearby each other. It's not like we were in the office and collaboration magically popped out the other side, right? There's plenty of people going to offices working next to each other with headphones on. They're not collaborating any more than somebody who's, in their house. I think the actual question of collaboration is one of, remote or not remote, is actually about sync versus async. And it's about how the organization values people's time and values their work. So if, for example, the way that you evaluate your software developers is by the number of story points they ship or whatever, right? Then if two software developers sit together and work together on the same problem, you will look at that as a net loss. You'll say, hey, I could have doubled my productivity if I'd had those two people work separately, asynchronously. Whereas if what you value is the quality of the outcomes, if you say, hey, what I care about is that the right software gets built for the right people in the right way at the right time, and that I can see that that software is validated with the people who needed it, then suddenly it starts to make sense that you'd be like, well, look, if the right software gets built by three people sitting together in a Zoom all day for a week, that's what I want. That's better. It's not worse. That's actually what I want. That's collaboration. And it also happens synchronously, right? Those people have to be together to do it. And you see this a lot with product people too. Like one of the most common sins for product people is that they don't go touch the engineers who are building the work. And so they become really disconnected from the truth of what's happening in the software for the things that they hope will happen for customers. And that happens because we tend to build systems that aren't collaborative, right? The PM's job is to write a spec. The spec goes into the ticketing system. The job of the engineers is to look at the tickets and pull them through the system. If the PM put the wrong things in, well, too bad, so sad. I just pulled the ticket and worked my spec, and then we'll loop around in 2 weeks, right? So I think it's silly to say that it's a remote work or on-prem problem. I think it's a system design problem, and it's a question of what you value. If you value collaboration and you value people working together to build great outcomes, then being remote or being in the office can work just fine. System Initiative is fully remote, and we got people in Brazil and Canada and all over the US and Northern Ireland and the UK. And we work highly synchronously. Like there's lots of overlap and people work together constantly. I've talked to people more often at System Initiative than I've ever talked to anyone in any company ever in my life. And we're fully remote.
Yeah, that's I asked that because you mentioned collaboration, and we constantly are hearing about the need to move back in the office to work together. And I always kind of reflect on the fact that we have so many decades of traditions, systems, processes built around that office component that the 3 years that we've been remote does really rub against that. Like it's all of a sudden opening our eyes to what you said. We can collaborate while we're not sitting next to each other, not talking to each other. And that's not always easy to move that needle in some people's views.
I mean, I think when you think about how to collaborate with people, I've never in my life have I been as productive as a product person or an engineer as I am at System Initiative. And part of the change is that no process is allowed to be asynchronous. Like everything we do is synchronous. So we don't talk about documents that somebody wrote. We talk to each other about the problem, and then we build an artifact that's a reflection of the collaboration. So it's a subtle distinction. But like one thing that happens when you are highly synchronous and remote is that you can summon people immediately. So like in a building, if we're in a 1,000-person office building, we have to schedule a room. We have to be like, where physically in this building are we going to find each other to collaborate? How long are we allowed to stay there to collaborate to the thing that we want to do? And like on and on and on, there's a ton of complexity. Remote can remove all of that complexity from you, right? You can suddenly be like, well, look, I can just be on Slack, type /Zoom, and now I got 5 people and we're all here and we're synchronously collaborating. I don't have to schedule a fuck all, right? And it's a real thing, and it ties really directly into what's wrong with our DevOps outcomes. Like we did not design our companies, period, to actually be collaborative. When we built DevOps tools, this is why people have always said that like it's about culture more than tooling, because they're like, well, if you get the collaboration right, the tooling doesn't matter, which is true. And also the tooling does push us either towards collaboration or away from collaboration, right?
Maybe talk to us about, we mentioned the collaboration, the tooling, knowing what you should be focused on. I guess when we're looking at what hasn't worked, obviously, and why people make certain decisions in their DevOps practice and principles as they're implementing, what are some of those top things?
I mean, I want to be clear that like it has worked.
Yes.
Like if you compare like DevOps, the world before DevOps and the world after DevOps, like nobody seriously wants to go back. I don't think that's true. I think there's people who've totally forgotten what the world before DevOps was like, and they're pretty convinced that it would work this time if only they had like an API or whatever to their like platform team. And like I think that's wrong, but God bless them. Like
change release was very painful to actually have to coordinate with one person that was responsible for when you could actually think about making a change.
It was pretty tough. And I mean, if you think about like, not to pick on platform engineering, but I'm totally going to pick on platform engineering just for a minute, right? Like the storyline that says what you should have is a platform engineering team. Application developers focus on application development. Then they pass off their source code to systems administrators who run the platform that their code runs on and are responsible for that code running in production. You know what that sounds a lot like? 1999. That's exactly what we did in 1999. And the only difference here is you put fucking Backstage in front of it. You were like, which we did. We had like a wiki. So, but now you got Backstage, which look is better. And I'm not saying it's bad, but when you think about the organizational dynamics of what we're asking people to do, those separations, we're calcifying those separations because the result of trying to collaborate with these subpar collaboration tools has shown us that the outcomes aren't as good. And so then you're like, well, why don't I go back to this other way where even though the outcomes necessarily weren't as great on some vector, they were maybe better for the application developer. Like, I don't know that it's better to be an application developer in the modern era than it was to be an application developer in 1999. I know it's better to be a systems administrator for sure. But like, if like I was a pretty reliable software deployment guy, and if you didn't, and they didn't have to think about it because I was there, and now they do, and that's probably a bummer, right?
The hardware side isn't quite. I mean, obviously, going to throw it back to back in the day, but were you also was part of your job responsible for hardware sizing?
Totally. Yeah.
Was that the fun part? Trying to guess exactly.
I mean, I love that part too. You did like, but people don't know how to do capacity planning anymore because they don't need to, because they have the cloud, blah, blah, blah. But what's interesting, I was in a conversation with some like Fortune 100 people the other day, and their lead time for new cloud infrastructure for some of their internal teams, 6 weeks. Right? You say what you need, you say what you want, you say what the scope of the application is, and the operations team goes and creates that infrastructure for you, hands it back to you, and helps you deploy your application against it. You know what the lead time used to be on servers, racking and stacking? 6-8 weeks. And most of that lead time was waiting for the servers for sure, but also it wasn't. It was like systems administrators installing operating systems and wiring things together in racks. And, a lot of what we've done was we took that manual process that we understood and the way that we worked, and then we've just automated it, which made it go faster, which is great. And that's how we got to the gains we got. So in some ways it got better, but we didn't fundamentally ask ourselves, like, is this actually the best way to work? Is this actually the best way to collaborate on designing and deploying and operating these large scale systems we have to operate? What would a technology solution be to that problem? Instead, we were just throwing shit against the wall because every day we had a new problem. It was like, we got to get all these people on the internet. Well, shit, we better automate it. We got to get applications on the internet. How do we deploy them faster? Oh my God, now there's social media. We can get 1 billion users in an hour. How do we deal with that? Like on and on and on. We just, we were in crisis mode the whole time. And I think where we've wound up is better than nothing, and has moved the needle really far. But it doesn't feel very good. If you search your heart, you're like, do you like it? Not really. Like, what's the funnest part of the stack? It's not the DevOps part. It's not the part where you like glued it all together. What's the long pole in that deployment scenario in that Fortune 100 people I just talked about? Wasn't the app? I mean, it is the application development, but not in the end. In the end, they're like, well, if I didn't know what the shape of the infrastructure I needed was 6 weeks before the code was complete, like, then my code's complete and I'm waiting 6 weeks to get it deployed. And, that's like really common. I don't think that that's them being particularly bad at the work. I think that's actually like about average. And even in that company, not everyone works that way, right? There are pockets of high collaboration. There are pockets of high intensity. And so if you look at who's winning and who's losing in this game, the winners are always high collaboration. They're always building, and frequently the high collaboration comes with bespoke automation. We're highly collaborative. We built it all ourselves. And like, yeek.
Yeah, I guess I think the collaboration piece is interesting because people try to find ways. They try to bring efficiency to it. They try to find simpler ways to get people to collaborate. They don't always know if it suits everybody. They're not sure if it, some people learn differently. Some people collaborate differently. It's all, I guess it's a very challenging thing, not just for DevOps, just for anything really. But when you're looking at DevOps specifically, are there particular points in which collaboration is at a premium versus not, or is it pretty consistent in terms of how important collaboration is across the whole time?
That's a great question. I think it's probably there's a couple different pieces. To me, the first piece of it is a transparency visibility problem. So a lot of times when people talk about transparency, they think about it as not only being able to see the information, but also being able to change the information, right? Also being able to like change the outcomes of whatever it is. When I say transparency, I really just mean, can you see it? And so if you think about the number one obstacle in collaborating together, it's that the visibility into what has happened or what needs to happen across all of the different expertise areas that are necessary to make a software deployment successful is pretty bad. So if you think about the source code, if you think about, Terraform, for example, and this is just, I could use Pulumi, I could use Chef. Maybe I should use Chef so that people don't think I'm picking on anybody. But like, if you understand the source code or the language that you're looking at, and you understand what the syntax means, and you understand what the implications are, then you can sort of read a diff and kind of try to understand what's about to happen, but not really. You can't really understand like why. You can't really understand the implications of like, well, is it going to restart the database if I change the tag? I don't know. There's a ton of implicit knowledge, sort of not only in the DevOps, in the infrastructure as code part of the DevOps loop, but think about testing. Think about like, what's that test mean? What's the application? Why does the application getting deployed? What is it supposed to do? How do we turn it on or off, right? Those are the parts where collaboration becomes critical, because you're like, because without it, you're either have to say that the people who are putting the inputs in are constrained on what they can put in, because we need to only allow them to do things that are safe, and that they can't sort of understand what's underneath them, because that would be unsafe for them, because they can't manipulate it safely. Or you say they have to become experts in everything, right? So application developer, now you have to be an expert in your language of choice, plus your domain problem, plus Terraform, plus the cloud provider, plus this, plus that. That's also bullshit and won't work. And so that collaborative loop, I think, does really hit across the board in terms of where is it necessary? I mean, it's kind of at every stage. The question is, how frequently do you need to do it? And the answer there is, it depends, right? On what the change is, and who's doing it, and what kind of systems are they observing. The issue we have, I think, is that if you look at how we glue the tools together, it's very difficult to have a perspective that would allow you, an individual, to dive in and out of all the complexities of what's happening as they move through those deployment pipelines. And that becomes a problem of not even knowing who to summon to collaborate with. Like, who would I even call? And how would I know that they know what's going on? And how would I quickly get them up to speed to what's happening? And those sorts of things are, I think, the critical path. So like, it probably happens more often when we think about net new applications versus versus deployments of existing applications. Unless those applications have dramatic infrastructure changes attached on one deployment to another, right? We're adding a caching layer for performance, and like that has application concerns, it has infrastructure concerns, it has this, it has that. Collaboration has to increase on those things. But the same thing happens post facto, right? So the application has a performance problem, there's a user-facing error, there's an outage. How do we repair it? Well, in order to repair it, we need to understand what the system is. We need to understand the flow of change that went through it. We need to understand like how the infrastructure is built and configured and performing. We need to understand all this stuff, all of which requires expertise. So step one, how do we even get people the information that would allow them to try to serve themselves if they could and raise that level of knowledge of the system across the thing? Step two, if they don't have that knowledge, how do they summon an expert? And how does that expert get up to speed on the problem quick enough that they can help those other people solve their problems?
And I guess, you have been in the DevOps tool space from the beginning.
For a long time.
A long time. Yeah. I mean, you're part of the core, and obviously, we're seeing more tools. We're seeing a second wave. We're seeing, trying to find the little gaps that need to be filled by those tools. I guess as you're kind of seeing this second wave and trying to address some of the gaps, obviously collaboration's key. What are some of the gaps that these next generation tools should be filling and are filling?
I mean, it's when I think about it, like why we need a second wave of DevOps tools, it's actually because I really believe that systemic workflow is broken. And so because that systemic workflow is broken, we need a dramatic amount of innovation underneath. Because if you take the existing tools, Rick Rubin has a great quote about if you follow all the rules, what you get are average outcomes. And average is nothing to aspire to, right? And I think he's really quite right when you think about like, if you stitch together the existing tools we have in the way we know how to do it, we know exactly what's going to happen to you. And like, we know what's going to happen in the best case, we know what's going to happen in the worst case. We know you're going to land somewhere in the middle because that's just what happens to everybody when they stitch those tools together in the shape that they exist. And so we need a second wave of DevOps tools because we want an order of magnitude better outcomes. We've always wanted an order of magnitude better outcomes. If you read the opening of the DevOps handbook, they didn't say we hope 10% of companies can figure out how to do this well for a small percentage of their engineers, right? We were like, no, we want everyone to be able to do this. We want everyone to work this way. We want everybody to be able to like have this experience. So yeah, I think that second wave of DevOps, they need to focus in on what are the different approaches that fundamentally break some of those rules and some of those structures and some of that shape down. So like a good example is, system initiative is one. I got my own take on how I think we could rebuild that structure. I think like the folks who make Q. So Q is like a configuration language. And they have this core bet that says everything is actually configuration for the most part. And so if we just get incredibly great at expressing configuration in a uniform way, and then we can bring a bunch of interesting analysis and tooling to the management of that configuration in the large, which will then enable people to collaborate better on solving this bigger problem. So their bet is it's an expression problem. Awesome. I don't know if I think they're right or wrong. In my heart, I probably think it won't work, but it might work and it's definitely new. Like that is a swing that will have impact. It will change fundamentally the way people work. And I bet more than one team has adopted Q and gotten real success by seeing that model. You can look at stuff like Railway, where Railway's bet is very similar to what Heroku's bet was, but it'll be different this time because the technology platform's better, right? We've got years of analysis and we could think differently about how we stitch it together, and it works this way, not that way. So now it's easier to integrate and we can have more systems and blah, 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 blah. Great. Will that work? Again, I don't know. In the same way that, you could say the same about system initiative, right? I think it's digital twins and a modeling problem that allows us to build fast feedback loops and a bunch of other stuff. Is that the way? I think so. But what we need is like 10 more of those where people are like, here's my fundamentally different bet. Like if you just pulled this thing and looked at it sideways and it worked this way, not that way, what would happen? Because if we don't do that, we're kind of doomed to just march around in a circle, making incremental improvements on average outcomes.
I actually like that a lot. And I think I actually subscribe to that. If you really want to make a tangible change, you have to actually alter something. And that
Something has to change.
something has to, it's going to be uncomfortable as well. I mean, if it's a comfortable change,
Yeah.
you might not be going big enough.
And you might fail.
Yeah.
Like it, and people will definitely say that you're a dummy, right? Like if you're actually like, I have no expectation that everybody who encounters system initiative, at least in the beginning, is going to be like, that's the thing for me. Like they're not gonna, because I broke a ton of rules, right? We broke all of them and have built this fundamentally different way of doing this work. And it's really early days, and it's very easy to look at it and be like, I don't believe you. And that's great. I do. I believe in me. I believe in that approach. I know that I've worked on it for years. I believe it's going to work. I can see it. And other people will see it eventually too. But yeah, when you think about second wave DevOps in particular and the need that the industry has right now, I think it just needs a moment of recognition that says, look, we still believe that those ambitions that we held when we started the DevOps movement were the right ambitions, and that we made a real impact and a real change materially in the lives of a lot of different people and in the way that those organizations work for the better. We did that. It was amazing. And it didn't wind up as good as we hoped it would be. And if we want it to be better, and I think we should want it to be better, it's going to require more digging in and more fundamental change than we thought.
And I like your take on this, because I think if I'm sitting listening to this, and I'm like, you know what, I agree with that. It's things could be better. Some of this is in response to a legacy solution. Those issues have gone away. We've actually now evolved past a few iterations from that legacy problem. I'd like to do something different, but I'm also responsible for not breaking stuff, because people are going to know. Like, it's hard to hide. It's going to be really hard to hide.
Yeah.
How would you go about going, hey, you know what? I'm going to subscribe to this theory. I do need to make some changes. I'm going to look at some of these tools. I'm going to review DevOps from a different angle. How do I do that, though?
It's a tough one, because the answer is always by just taking the risk, right? Like, how does great art get made? Like, there was a moment before a song was written, and then there was a moment after the song was written, and in between, you didn't know it was going to come out. But you picked up a guitar, you played the piano, you made a painting, whatever it was you did, and this is art. And it's roughly the same. Like, you have to just decide that you're unsatisfied with the status quo, and then you look at the circumstances in which you find yourself, and you say, hey, does the right set of circumstances coincide with whatever it is that I have to say, or whatever my angle that I have to express is on this technical problem or on our organizational problem? And then can you find the security to safety to be able to actually make a pass at making that change and building that art? I think for most people at the current stage, it is going to be a little limited to the people who both have the expertise and the space to be able to sort of take a flyer at something different. And that's going to be a small amount of people for a while, but not for long, because as people try new solutions, as they try new mechanisms, as they think about new ways of conceiving of the problem and of the space, when we find what works, it's going to resonate, because the problem is so real, right? I don't think that most people listening to this podcast are going to be like, that's not my problem. Like, this doesn't resonate with me at all. Like, if you do this work, the odds that what we've been talking about resonates with you is pretty fucking high, because it's what's happening. It's not like, I'm not making it up. It's not marketing spiel. Like, it's the truth. And when you say it that way, you're just like, okay, if that's the truth, some of us are in a position to be able to do something about it, and some of us aren't. And so the people who are in a position to do something about it, I'm privileged enough to have been successful at Chef, to have system initiative. I've raised venture capital. I've got a team of 20 people working-ish, a little less than 20, but 20 is the round number, working on system initiative all day. Like, that's incredible. And I can take a big swing and I can try to build something new. But there's lots of other people in similar positions, either because they have venture capital or because they just have a great idea and they just want to see it happen. And I think once the seed is planted in people's minds that it's a time for new innovation, it's a time for new approaches, it's a time for this experimentation, what we're going to see is that seed land. And you can't predict where or how it will grow. Like it could just as easily be happening inside. It is definitely, I'm sure, happening inside, some team somewhere at a global bank, some team somewhere at a giant manufacturing facility or a auto manufacturer, or, a rent to own furniture company, or like it could be anywhere. You just don't know. And it's just about how do you create the right kind of soil and the right kind of circumstances to allow that to happen? And so to me, step one of getting people to that point is just letting them hear from somebody else. I see you. I understand what your problem is. This is what's happening. We don't have to settle for it. It can be better. And but it's going to require you to make new art. It's going to require you to get in the game and take a swing. That whatever that idea is you've had in your head where you're like, well, but I could do it, but GitHub Actions is good enough. Or I could do it, but Jenkins. Or I could do it, but Terraform. Or I could do it, but you should just stop. Because we know that those things lead you to the mediocre outcomes. So fuck them. Go build that crazy new thing and let's see if it's better. It probably won't be, because it's hard to build something better than the things that we already have. But it's not impossible. And I think we want better outcomes.
You know what? You gotta test. You gotta test. If you wanna, if you're gonna start someplace and you wanna, create a different outcome, you gotta run the test to see if it's viable. Otherwise, if it's status quo,
you gotta see where it goes.
Change. Yeah.
And one of the things that we don't do a great job of as an industry is just encouraging each other to make great art. I don't like I said a minute ago, I don't know if Q is going to work, if it's the right answer to the problem, or Wing. Wing is another company that has a really interesting angle on this problem. I don't think that's probably the answer, but I want to see more Wings in the world. I'm stoked that Wing exists. I'm stoked they're pushing on that problem from that angle. I'm I want to see it. I want to see it happen. And if it works, fucking great. Because it'll make the impact and change that we all want to see. And I think we need to do more cheering on of just getting people into the game of being yeah, no, you have a wacky idea. Rather than telling you all the reasons why that wacky thing won't work, let's just cheer you on for building more of that art. Let's just get you to a spot where you're yeah, no, it's fucking great that what you have an idea for a new deployment automation scripting language. Write that language. Show us what's up. Let's see what that is, because great art happens in conversation with other art, right? So it can't be that I go off alone and I noodle on System Initiative in an ivory tower, and then I pop it out into the world and I'm System Initiative fixes everything. A, that's not going to happen. And B, there's nobody to converse with. There's no puts and takes. There's no movement. There's no conversation. And I think that movement is afoot, and we need to think of it as one. And I think we need to think of it as an extension of the existing DevOps movement. I don't think it's not a replacement. It's not a new thing. We already have this movement, in the same way that punk rock was still rock and roll, right?
And I guess, it's interesting because, as I hear you say, go try to do the new thing, I think back to you. I've read your bio, and obviously when it came to Chef,
same thing.
It's same thing. You found something to fix a solution for yourself, and it became a thing.
And I really believed that it was going to be a bigger threat. I mean, it turned into, Chef was a huge success on so many different levels. And I'm so proud of it. And I'm proud of everything that happened. And I'm proud of the people. I'm proud of the work we did. I'm proud of the impact we had, all of that. But, when I started pulling on that thread, I thought there was more universality there than there turned out to be. I thought there was more. I thought we'd be able to get further in the pattern that we were under. It's not like when we started out doing this DevOps work and started out doing all this automation. I was selling fully automated infrastructure to startups. 16, 18 years ago, something like that, where you would like pay us a flat fee and we would fully automate everything from scratch. And the fastest we automated a startup was 24 hours. So they paid us a fee and we fully automated their whole company in 24 hours. And we were doing that, what is now almost 20 years ago. And like, I think so my belief that we could take that, what we did then, and that we could then turn that into something we could sell to the enterprise and it would work at scale. Like I believed that was true. I was wrong, but now I know I was wrong because the shape of what we were automating and the way we were doing it is actually a mismatch for the true core problem. The true core problem, we're not talking to each other enough. We don't work together correctly. We can't see the information we need. And because we couldn't do that, like when it goes up, the bigger the organization gets, the worse the automation performs. The same thing that performed great at 5 people performed terrible at 20. Why? Well, because 5, it didn't matter how janky the tool chain was. It didn't matter how much complexity we were pushing it. It didn't matter how we modeled it or how we put the glue together. You know, suddenly it's a company of 100,000, super matters because they don't know how to talk to those people. They don't even know who they are, right? They don't know what those answers are. And so a technology platform that keeps them apart from each other drives bad outcomes. We didn't know, but we do now. And we should fix it.
It feels like you're coming back with System Initiative to pull out some of those new threads. I have a feeling that there's threads that you're interested in pulling.
Yeah, because I part of why I left Chef was that I was frustrated that I could tell people what to do and I wasn't wrong about how to like build the automation or even how to run the teams in a way that would get them the maximum benefit of deciding to do this automation. And also they weren't gonna. Like they were 100% going to make changes to the shape of how that worked or the way those people were going to work together that then caused the whole system to degrade back to the mean. And, you know, you do that enough times. And even if you get high-fived in the initial meeting where they tell you how great you are, in my heart, I know that it's like, that it's going to work and you're going to be happy with me, but it's not actually going to work the way that we wanted it to. And that's kind of what led me to System Initiative was that like, I didn't want to play myself on TV and not actually have a path to help you figure out how to do it for real.
I love it, Adam. I think it all sounds exciting. I'm sure people are going to reach out with questions because there's a lot here. If somebody does want to reach out, what is a good way of actually touching base with you?
Yeah, the best way is to come join the System Initiative Discord. I'm there all the time and you can just talk to me there. You can summon me to video there. Like all that stuff is very easy to do. You can also find me. I'm Adam at systeminitiative.com. So you could just like send me an email. Systeminit.com. Sorry. You could also, you can find me on Twitter, X. Do we have to call it X now?
That's a tricky one still.
I'm Adam HJK on X or Twitter or whatever we call it this week. I'm you can find me on Mastodon and Blue Sky, and I'm on all of the things. So I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. There's even like, I've given my phone number out publicly a lot and no one ever calls it. So, you could call me on the phone and the odds that I'll answer and talk to you is pretty high. So yeah, I'm not hard to find.
I like it. Well, we'll include some of those in the show notes because I'm sure people are going to want to actually figure out or ask you some of the details of what we talked about. You covered a lot of ground. I do appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
So fun.
Absolutely. No, that was awesome. And we'll definitely be back again. Hopefully we'll have you on. Actually, we'll have you on maybe in, down the road year and see how the progress, year and a half, see how the progress has gone. I think you'll have a ton to share with us. And we'll be talking about the third wave and what you're seeing then, because I'm sure you see these things early in your mind.
How lucky would we be if the second wave moved that fast?
Right? It's probably not. But hey,
I don't think
crossed.
so. I think we got time.
So. Yeah, we got some time.
But I hope it does. Your lips to God's ears, yeah?
Hey, you know what? The technology iterates faster and faster. So maybe somebody is, somebody.
And System Initiative is incredibly collaborative right now. We're working really good together. So, velocity's high. So
I like it. I like it. Awesome, man. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's it for the episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. If there is a topic you want me to cover, please reach out to me. Let me know. I'll do my best to find somebody to speak to it. Share this episode with somebody else that's going to benefit. It was a great topic. Adam covered a lot of ground for you guys. So please share that. Like, subscribe, Leave a review wherever you're listening to this. I'd appreciate that. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.